The assignment landed in my inbox at 6:47 on a Tuesday morning. No headline, no brief. Just my editor, Harriet, typing in that clipped way she does when she's already 3 cups of coffee deep and completely out of patience for full sentences. Horse guards. Nine to morgens. The tall one. Get something. I stared at it for a long time. Get something. 12 years I've been doing this. Parliament scrums. Warzone and beds. I once sat across from a warlord in a room that smelled like diesel and fear and managed to pull quotes for 37 minutes before his bodyguard decided I'd had enough. I had a scar on my left wrist from a photographer's tripod that caught me during a riot in Brussels. I had a contact list that would make certain people in Whitehall genuinely nervous. And Harriet was sending me to stand in front of a man who was not legally allowed to speak. I made my coffee. I found my coat. I went. October in London does something specific to the light. It doesn't disappear exactly. It just goes thin like the city is running on a budget. The sky over Whitehall that morning was the color of old pewter, flat, and non-committal, and the wind coming off the Thames had that particular bite that isn't quite cold enough to justify stopping, but isn't warm enough to ignore. I walked from the tube with my hands in my pockets, and my recorder in my bag, and my notebook pressed against my ribs like a talisman. Horse Guards Parade is not Buckingham Palace. Tourists know the palace, the flags, the gates, the balcony. Horse Guards is where the ones who've been before tend to come. The ones who've looked it up, who want the older, stranger version of the ceremony. The mounted sentries in breastplates. The archway where 2 centuries of London history have been breathed in and out like a slow lung. I'd been here before, obviously. Done the photo package on the changing of the guard 3 years ago for the weekend supplement. But that had been summer. August. Queues 4 deep, and Japanese tour groups, and a child's balloon that broke free and bobbed past the sentry box like it had somewhere important to be. This was different. This was October, a Tuesday before 9, and the handful of people gathered near the gate had that particular quality of the truly committed, the photography obsessives with lenses the size of small missiles. One elderly man in a red anorak who looked like he'd been coming here since the 1970s and simply hadn't stopped. A young couple, French from the sound of them, who were pointing at the mounted sentry with a muted wonder of people who had not quite expected the horse to be real. I stopped at the edge of the pavement. He was already there. I want to be careful about how I describe him, because the easy version, the postcard version, is lazy, and he deserved better than lazy, even before I knew anything about him. He wasn't tall in the way models are tall, some attenuated, curated thing. He was tall the way old door frames are tall. Structural, functional, built for a specific purpose, and then left to hold things up. 6'3", maybe. Blues and royals, so the helmet was the plumed one, silver chain under the chin, the red tunic, the boots so black they stopped the light rather than reflected it. He stood at the sentry box on the right side of the arch, not moving, not even, and this is the thing that stopped me, actually made me pause mid-step, not even appearing to breathe. I'd seen sentries before. You look at them, you get your photo, you look away. The stillness is part of the point, isn't it? It's supposed to be a demonstration, a performance of absolute control. You admire the form the way you admire a stop clock. It's impressive because it's impossible, and it's impossible because someone trained for years to make it so. But there are levels to stillness. Most sentries, you watch them long enough, you catch something. A micro-adjustment of the jaw. A weight shift that the untrained eye misses, but that the camera sometimes catches. The throat working once. Alive in there. The stillness says, I am exerting enormous effort to appear this way. This one said something different. I couldn't name it yet. I just knew I didn't put my recorder away. I found a spot that wasn't in anybody's photograph. This is a skill journalists develop. The ability to occupy space without appearing to occupy it. You angle your body slightly wrong. You look at a 0.6 inches past your actual subject. You breathe slowly, and you don't write anything down yet, and you let the scene come to you rather than going after it, because the going after is when people close up and subjects perform, and you end up with nothing but their surface, which is the thing they've already decided to show the world. And is therefore the least interesting thing about them. I stood there for 11 minutes. He did not move. Not a tremor. Not a blink I could catch. The red anorak man was on his third circuit of the archway. The French couple had taken their photographs and wandered toward the parade ground. 2 Japanese tourists had arrived and were doing the thing where they photograph the sentry and then each other and then the sentry again like a bracket. A pigeon landed on the cobbles 6 feet from his boots and walked a small, stupid loop and flew away. He didn't look at it. His eyes, and I was close enough now, maybe 15 feet, to see this, were fixed on a point directly ahead. Middle distance. Specific and unwavering in a way that felt chosen rather than trained into him. Most people, when they fix their gaze, are actually fighting the urge to let it drift. You can see the effort. It's a constant small war between the intention and the instinct. His eyes weren't fighting anything. They just were. The idea came to me the way bad ideas always come. Fast, clean, feeling much more intelligent than it was. No quotes. Fine. No responses. Fine. But the assignment was get something, and Harriet, whatever her faults, had never specified the medium. I had 12 years and a war zone scar and a contact list that made Whitehall nervous. I had a recorder I wasn't going to use and a notebook I wasn't going to open. What I had, standing 15 feet from a man whose entire discipline was the art of non-response, was time and patience and eyes. I was going to interview him the only way left available. I was going to do it without a single word. I moved closer, slowly, the way you approach a subject you don't want to spook. Not that he was spookable, not that anything about him suggested spookability, but the movement itself mattered. Intention matters. Even when the other person can't see you seeing it, intention changes the quality of what you're doing. I stopped at what I estimated was 10 feet. Close enough to see his face properly. Far enough to be standing in the ordinary space that tourists occupy. Not the restricted area the signs clearly indicated you should not approach. I wasn't breaking any rules. I was just standing, looking. Estou riso. Except I wasn't looking the way tourists look. Tourists look at sentries the way they look at paintings, with one eye on themselves, checking their own reaction, ready to perform appreciation. I was looking the way I'd looked at the warlord in the diesel smelling room, fully, without the self-consciousness, as though I had a question and genuinely believed, that the answer was in there somewhere if I was patient enough to wait for it. His face was, I want to find the right word here, not blank, blanc en pli absence. This was the opposite of absence. This was a face that had been made very deliberate. Every muscle in a chosen position, the jaw set but not clenched, the mouth neither tight nor soft, the eyes forward. And yet underneath the deliberateness, or maybe through it like light through very thick glass, there was a quality I kept catching and then losing again. I've interviewed enough people to know that the face someone chooses to show you is rarely the interesting one. It was the one underneath I was after. 7 minutes in, a child broke away from a family group to my left. 5 years old, maybe 6. Blue coat, red wellies, the kind of absolute purposefulness that small children have when they've decided something. She walked right up to the edge of the restricted area, stopped just short of it, which surprised me. Actually, some instinct for lines she couldn't yet read, and stared up at him. Not with a tourist curiosity, with a child's, which is a fundamentally different thing. "Mummy," she said, without turning around, "he's not real." The mother materialized behind her with the practiced swiftness of someone who has learned that unattended children near anything historic are a liability. Of course he's real, sweetheart, but he doesn't move. He's being very still because it's his job. The child considered this with visible skepticism. Then she looked up at him again, and in a voice that was entirely too reasonable for someone in red wellies, she said, "Does he like his job?" The mother made the sound of a parent who has been asked a question she cannot answer without either lying or making things complicated. She took the child's hand and steered her back toward the family group with gentle, practiced efficiency. The child looked back over her shoulder. I looked at him, and this is the part I've tried to describe to 3 different people since, and haven't managed yet. For 1/5 of a second, less, maybe a camera would have missed it. The absolute geometry of his face shifted. Not a smile, not anywhere close, but something, some small interior weather that crossed his features so briefly I genuinely couldn't tell you if I'd actually seen it or invented it from wanting. I wrote it down anyway, in my head, which was the only notebook I was using. He heard her. He felt it. He chose not to show it. Those are three separate facts, and each one matters. The wind picked up off the parade ground. A tourist to my right said something to her companion in what sounded like Dutch. The red anorak man completed another circuit. A car moved through the arch behind the sentry and disappeared into the courtyard beyond. I stayed where I was, 10 feet, eyes forward, waiting for what comes after the surface, the way you wait for the tide to go out. Not because you can make it happen, but because it will, given enough time and enough stillness on your part. I was 34 years old. I've been waiting for things my whole career. I could wait. 22 minutes in, he looked at me. I want to be precise about what I mean, because looked at covers too much ground. Tourists had been drifting through his sight line all morning. A woman in a yellow parka had stood directly in his eye line for a solid 4 minutes, taking photographs of herself. A man had leaned in to show his small son something. Pointing at the helmet, explaining something, the kid nodding with the polite blankness of a child who is thinking about something else entirely. All of them had passed through that fixed forward gaze like objects moving through a beam of light. None of it had been looked at. What happened at minute 22 was different. His gaze didn't move. The angle of his head didn't shift. From 3 feet to either side of me, you wouldn't have seen anything change. But the quality of the attention, the direction of it, landed on me with a specificity that made the back of my neck go warm. I didn't look away. That was the whole exercise, wasn't it? Look away, and the interview ends before it begins. They're the thing that happens when two people hold eye contact past the socially comfortable threshold. Neuroscientists have written about it, philosophers before them, and novelists forever. The body begins to make calculations it doesn't share with the conscious mind. Questions get asked at a level below language. Who are you? What do you want? Are you a threat? Are you? I kept my face open. This is a technique, a real one. You soften the muscles around the eyes. You let the jaw go slightly slack. You breathe through your nose. You perform, very consciously, the absence of agenda. You're not interrogating. You're not performing. You're just here, looking. A person standing in front of another person with nothing to prove and nowhere else to be. Whether he read it, I can't say. What I can say is that the eye contact didn't break. 30 seconds. Long enough that a woman to my left, mid-30s professional camera, clearly here with purpose, noticed what was happening and lowered her lens slightly and glanced between us with the expression of someone trying to diagnose a situation. 1 minute. The wind had dropped. The courtyard had gone, by some coincidence of tourist rhythm, briefly quieter. The Dutch couple had moved on. The red anorak man had settled on a bench at the edge of the parade ground. The Japanese tourists were somewhere behind me now. There was a gap in the ambient noise of the city, one of those weird London silences that happen sometimes in the middle of everything. 10 seconds where the traffic patterns and the wind and the ordinary human chatter all line up to create a pocket of near quiet. We were inside it, him and me. 10 feet of cobblestone. No notebook, no ricorde, no words. And I know how this sounds, to ask him things. Not out loud. Obviously not out loud. But in the way you ask things when you've been in this job long enough and interviewed enough people in enough languages and through enough interpreters and through enough walls of PR and legal counsel. You learn to formulate the question as a thing you hold, a shape you make with your attention, and you wait to see what comes back. How long have you been here? Nothing moved on his face, but the eye contact held. Do you hear all of it? Everything people say when they think you can't hear? Still nothing. Still holding. What do you do with it? All the things you see and can't respond to. Where does it go? And here's the part where I need to ask you to believe me, because I'm a journalist, and journalists deal in what can be proven, and what happened next cannot be proven, and I'm writing it down anyway because leaving it out would be dishonest. Something changed in his eyes. Not the position of them. Not the focus. Something behind the focus. like a room where someone has adjusted the light by 1 degree. The room looks the same, but somehow you can see more of it. He had heard me, not the words. There were no words, but the intent, the weight of it, the genuine, non-performance nature of the curiosity. He had heard it, and he was, I don't have a better word, answering. I've been in rooms with a lot of powerful people, prime ministers who chose their silences the way chess players choose moves, generals whose stillness was a performance of authority, CEOs who held eye contact as a dominance display, measuring the second you blinked to calibrate how far they could push. I'd learned to read all of it. This was none of that. His stillness was not about me. It was not a performance calibrated to produce an effect on an observer. It was, and this is the thing that had caught me from the start, that had made me put my recorder away and just watch. It was internal. Something he'd built inside himself, some structure of quiet, and he lived in it the way some people live in houses they've built with their own hands. Not showing it off, just in it. The eye contact was not a power game. He was simply seeing me back. After 12 years of this job, I cannot tell you how rare that is. A group arrived, 12, 15 people, following a guide with one of those small umbrellas raised high. The guide was doing the thing they all do, gesturing at the arch, the history, the dates, and the battles and the names, and the group swept around me like water around a stone and briefly broke the sight line. When they cleared, his gaze had returned to the middle distance. The contact was gone. I let out a breath I hadn't known I'd been holding for the last. I checked my watch. 90 seconds. We'd held it for 90 seconds. 90 seconds doesn't sound like a lot. Stand in front of someone and try it. Try it with someone you love. It gets strange around 40 seconds. Your brain starts firing signals that feel like danger, even though there is no danger. Eye contact, without words, past a minute, is one of the most uncomfortable things most people will voluntarily do, because the brain is not built for sustained looking at without the release valve of speech. Is it all day? Every day? With everyone? With no release valve? I thought about that for a long time. I thought about what you become, spending enough years of your life being looked at, photographed, pointed at, poked at the boundary of your restricted space, talked about in the third person while you stand 3 feet away, and choosing over and over not to respond. What muscle that builds. What it costs. What the room inside the stillness actually contains. At minute 31, something happened that I hadn't planned for. A man, late 40s, cargo pants, the camera setup of someone who knows what he's doing, moved up to what was clearly the wrong side of the marked boundary. Not dramatically, just enough. One of those boundary testings that certain tourists do, not out of malice exactly, just a pushing at edges, a wanting to see what happens. I watched the sentry's body language the way I've watched barometers. Nothing telegraphed. Nothing shifted ahead of time to warn you. He simply moved. 3 steps, precise as a metronome, emerging from a sentry box with his rifle at the slope in the position they call, I looked this up later, the slope arms. He didn't speak. He didn't look at the cameraman directly. He simply repositioned, and the repositioning itself was the communication, and it was unambiguous, and the cameraman stepped back immediately with the look of someone who has touched a hot stove and would like to pretend it didn't happen. 3 steps back to the box. 1 beat. Stationary again. The whole sequence had taken maybe 8 seconds. He was already back to the middle distance gaze, the geometry of the face restored, the stillness reinstated, as though the 8 seconds had been a parenthesis that closed behind him as he returned. The photographer to my left, the professional one who had noticed the eye contact earlier, turned to me with wide eyes. "Did you get that?" she said. I hadn't brought a camera. She looked at me. "Why are you here without a camera?" I looked back at the sentry. "Trying something different," I said. At minute 38, a man in his 70s joined the small cluster of observers. He was not a tourist. You develop an eye for this. The tourists have a quality of arrival, of having gotten somewhere. This man had the quality of return. He stood with his hands clasped behind his back, and his chin slightly raised, and his eyes on the sentry with an expression I can only describe as professional recognition. The way retired surgeons look at surgeries. The way old athletes watch young ones. He'd been this, or something close to it. Some version of this discipline, this stillness, this life inside the box. He watched for maybe 5 minutes without taking a photograph or saying anything to anyone. Then he nodded once to himself or to some private acknowledgement of something and walked away. The sentry's gaze didn't follow him, but I had the absolute irrational conviction that he'd known the man was there, that he'd felt the specific quality of being seen by someone who had stood in his boots, and that it was different from every tourist who'd pointed a phone at him today, and that somewhere inside the room of that stillness, something had registered. Not moved, not visibly felt. Registered, like a seismograph that records the tremor without shaking. 45 minutes. I hadn't moved. I was cold. The October thing had properly settled in now, coming through my coat at the collar and cuffs, and my feet ached in the way that feet ache when you've been standing on cobblestones in shoes that were not made for cobblestones. A pigeon had tried twice to land on a bollard near me, and I'd shoot it both times without thinking about it. The eye contact had happened once more. Minute 41. Briefer, maybe 30 seconds, and with something in it that felt different. Less measuring. More, I want to say familiar, but that sounds ridiculous given the context. Maybe what I mean is, the second time it felt less like being assessed and more like being acknowledged, which is, when you think about it, a kind of interview answer. My phone buzzed. Harriet. Anything? I looked at the sentry. He was not looking at me. I looked at the sky, flat pewter, a thin bar of lighter gray at the horizon where the sun was theoretically located. I looked at my phone. Working on it, I typed. She sent back a gif of a clock. She does this. It is not endearing. I put my phone away. The red anorak man, I noticed, had never left. He was still on his bench at the edge of the parade ground, his hands on his knees, watching the sentry the way you watch something you have watched 1,000 times, and still find, on some level, extraordinary. There was nothing on his face that needed a name. It was just the face of someone who keeps coming back, because the thing he is looking at is worth coming back to. I understood that, standing there on my cold feet with my useless recorder. I was going to come back too. I came back on Thursday. Same time, same place, same October pewter sky doing its budget thing with the light. Different coat. The other one had a broken zip, and the wind through the collar had been instructional in ways I didn't need repeated. Same recorder in my bag. Still not going to use it. He was there. Of course he was there. But something in me had been half afraid he wouldn't be, that they'd rotate the posting, put someone else on the box, and whatever had accumulated between us on Tuesday would reset to zero. I'm not a superstitious person. I have covered wars and elections and one genuinely cursed parliamentary select committee. I did not believe in signs. I was still relieved when it was him. The red anorak man wasn't there yet. The professional photographer wasn't there. It was earlier than Tuesday, and the courtyard had the particular quality that historic spaces have before the visitors arrive. Not empty exactly, but unconsumed. A security guard was drinking from a thermos near the inner gate. 2 pigeons were conducting an argument over something on the cobbles that I couldn't identify from distance. The sky above the arch was trying, weakly, at pale blue, and not quite making it. I stood in my spot. Not the same physical square inch of cobblestone. I wasn't that far gone, but the same general position. Same angle. Same distance. He did not acknowledge me arriving. Obviously he didn't. But I had the same irrational conviction I'd had on Tuesday about the retired soldier who'd watched and walked away, the conviction that the arriving was registered. That somewhere in the clockwork of his attention, something had noted, she is back. I've been laughed at for less specific intuitions than this by people with better credentials than mine, and I'd been right often enough that I'd stopped apologizing for it. He'd registered it. The stillness continued exactly as before. I settled in to wait. 15 minutes. A school group came through, secondary school, judging by the age, the teacher at the back walking with the stiff patience of someone managing 19 small catastrophes simultaneously. The kids were good, mostly the way kids are when there's somewhere that asks something of them. A few of them photographed the sentry on their phones. One girl, she couldn't have been more than 14, blazer untucked, the total confidence of someone who hasn't yet learned to be embarrassed, stood in front of him and said to nobody in particular but, loud enough for everyone. He has really nice eyes. The teacher made a noise. The girl, entirely unabashed. What? He does. The group moved on. The sentry's face held. But there was again, that 1/5 of a second shift I'd caught on Tuesday. The micro-weather. Gone before you could name it. He heard that too. I added it to the column. The accumulation I'd been building since Tuesday, the inventory of tiny responses to the world that his discipline required him to swallow whole. The child asking if he liked his job. The retired soldier's silent acknowledgement. The girl with the untucked blazer and her completely unself-conscious observation. Every single thing noted, filed, held. The room inside the stillness was not empty. I had suspected this on Tuesday, and I was certain of it now. It was full, stacked floor to ceiling with every sound and face and word that had passed through his sight line during every hour of every posting. He didn't let out. That was the discipline. But he kept it. All of it. What that meant for the man inside the uniform, I was only beginning to understand. 27 minutes in, I ran out of patience with myself. This is a professional failing or possibly a professional asset. I have never been able to sit on a question I actually care about for longer than I can manage the pretense of not caring. The interview instinct is involuntary. It fires whether I want it to or not. 12 years, and it has never once asked my permission. I step forward, not past the boundary, I'm not an idiot, but to the front edge of where ordinary civilians stand. 8 feet, maybe, the absolute minimum that was still technically permitted. He was looking at the middle distance. I positioned myself in it. Not directly. Not so that I was obviously deliberately in his sight line, because that felt adversarial, and adversarial was not what I was going for. Just nearby, in the vicinity of where his gaze was pointed. And I waited, and about 40 seconds later his eyes arrived on me. This time I was ready. I want to talk about what an interview actually is. Not the mechanics, the recorder, the notebook, the questions drafted on the train. The actual thing underneath all that. What is happening between two people when one of them is trying to know the other? I've thought about this a lot. Probably too much. My therapist has noted on more than one occasion that I conduct our sessions like I'm filing a profile. She is not wrong. It is a problem, but it has given me some clarity on the nature of the process. An interview, at its best, is not an extraction. It's not one person taking information from another the way you take money from an ATM. That is what it looks like from outside. That is the version in films. The journalist across the table, the subject trapped in the spotlight, the question tightening like a wire. What it actually is, at its best, is a temporary architecture. Two people agree, explicitly or not, to build something between them that neither could build alone. The journalist brings the question. The subject brings the answer. But the exchange, the actual thing that passes between them, is neither of those. It's something the contact itself generates, some quality of seeing and being seen that produces, in both parties, a recognition of what they didn't know they knew. You can do that with words. You can do it, it turns out, without them. The eye contact held. Longer this time. Much longer. I had the impression, and I could be wrong, I could be projecting, I accept this, that he knew what I was doing, that he had known since Tuesday, that the assessment at minute 22 had concluded in some internal tribunal, and he'd made a decision about me that I wasn't aware of until this moment. I built the question, the way I'd learned to build them, the shape of attention, the genuine, uncurated curiosity, the absence of agenda. Who were you before this? Not who are you now. The uniform answers that partially, and it isn't what I meant. Who were you before this became your face? Before the stillness became the default? Before you learned to keep all of it? The child's question, the soldier's nod, the 14-year-old's unsolicited compliment, inside the room instead of on the surface. His eyes were gray. I hadn't registered this before. You need to be close enough, and now I was, and they were gray the way overcast sky is gray, not empty, just full of something diffuse. Something that could be rain or could be clearing. And something in them, something I watched arrive the way you watch a weather system move across open water, deliberate, vast, unhurried, answered. Not a story, not a biography, not facts I could put in a notebook. An impression, a whole-person impression, The kind that comes from looking long enough at someone that the surface falls away, and you get, briefly, the thing that makes them them. I got it for about 4 seconds before a tour guide walked between us with 13 people in tow. 4 seconds is nothing. 4 seconds is the time it takes to pour a glass of water. 4 seconds is half a handshake, a quarter of a breath. 4 seconds of that kind of looking is a year's worth of press conference quotes. I'm going to tell you what I saw. I'm going to fail to tell you because language is the wrong instrument for this, which is why words aren't what the whole exercise was about. But I'll try. I saw someone who had made a choice that looked like sacrifice from outside and felt from inside like vocation. That's the word that arrived. Not job, not duty, not service. Though service was in there somewhere, underneath, the way foundations are underneath a house, invisible and weight-bearing. Vocation. The thing you do because the not doing of it would leave a specific hole that nothing else fills. I saw someone who was not unhappy. This sounds small. It isn't. Half my profile subjects are profoundly, specifically unhappy in ways they cannot name, doing things they didn't choose with people they didn't pick, and the interview is the place that surfaces, and the surfacing is the story. The unhappiness is the story. The gap between the face they show the world and the one they go home to. The gap in him was different. The face he showed the world and the face underneath were not enemies. The stillness he performed was not a suppression of something wilder. It was genuinely the form, the shape that fit the interior. He wasn't wearing the discipline like armor. He was wearing it like a second skin, a skin he'd grown on purpose. The last thing I saw, the last thing before the tour group swallowed the sight line, was this. He was paying attention. Not to me, not specifically to me, to everything. The sound of the group's feet on the cobblestones, the shift in the light as a cloud moved across the weak October sun, the pigeon that had returned to the Baller dispute, the distant sound of a bus on Whitehall. All of it, simultaneously, without choosing between any of it. He lived in a kind of total presence that I've spent 12 years and a fair amount of therapy attempting to approximate for maybe 40 minutes a day on a good day. He'd build it into himself like load-bearing walls. I stood there with my useless recorder and my irrational feelings about 4 seconds and thought, that's the story. That's what I came here for. He changed at 11. I watched the ceremony. The other ceremonial things happen on the hour here, the mounted sentries, the small assembly of it. And I watched the handover, the precision of it, the two figures in the archway, the transfer of what exactly? Of the position, of the responsibility, of the standing still, so that other people can have their photographs and their questions and their sense that something old and sturdy is holding its ground in the middle of a city that forgets nothing and changes everything. The man who had been in the box walked away down the arch and into the courtyard. Out of the uniform, he'd have a face like any face. He'd get a cup of tea somewhere, probably, and sit down, and his body would remember it was a body with opinions about October and cobblestones and 90-minute bouts of absolute stillness. He'd be someone's colleague. He'd be tired in a human way. But for 2 hours, he'd been something else. Something I couldn't put in a notebook. Something I couldn't put in 800 words for the weekend supplement. Either, which was going to be a problem with Harriet. I went home and sat at my desk for a long time. I opened a new document and typed the title, The Interview. And then I sat there looking at it because everything that came after the title was going to be the wrong instrument for what I wanted to say. Language was going to file it down. Make it make sense. Shrink it into a thing that could be transmitted over a page and that would arrive in the reader's hands slightly depleted from what it had been when I witnessed it. This happens sometimes. You see something true and the telling reduces it. You have to decide whether a reduced truth is better than silence. I chose the reduced truth. Journalists always do. It's the whole job. Choosing imperfect transmission over no transmission at all. But before I started writing, before I let the language do its necessary diminishment, I sat there for a while and I let myself just have it. The whole 2-hour Thursday of it. The eye contact. The micro-weather on his face when the child asked her question. The 90 seconds on Tuesday and the way my neck had gone warm and the back of my throat had gone something else, something I hadn't named yet. The 4 seconds before the tour group. The retired soldier's nod. The girl in the untucked blazer. The room inside the stillness and everything it held. The total presence. The vocation wearing like a second skin. I'd asked, who were you before this? And what I'd receive in 4 seconds of uncurated eye contact was the answer I hadn't thought to ask. This is who I always was. I just found a form that fitted. Harriet called at 3. Where's the piece? I'm working on it. You were there for 2 days, and you came back without a quote, a photograph, or a single piece of verifiable information. I came back with something better. Silence. The specific Harriet silence that means she is deciding whether to fire me or whether the thing I'm about to say is going to be good enough to justify the entire exercise. It better be, she said, and hung up. I put my hands on the keyboard. Outside, somewhere over the city, October was doing its thing with the light, thinning it, stretching it, making everything look like the hour before something either begins or ends. I started to write. There's a man who stands in an archway in the middle of London and does not speak. He hears everything. He shows nothing. He holds, in the room inside his stillness, more than most people manage to hold in a lifetime of words. I tried to interview him for 2 days, without a recorder, without a notebook, without a single syllable spoken between us. He answered me anyway. The answer is the thing I can't quite put in the newspaper. But I felt it. In 4 seconds, in 10 feet of October air, in a sightline no tour group could permanently interrupt. And if you've ever held eye contact with someone for long enough that the silence stops being silence and starts being something that language was invented to approximate, you already know what I mean.